Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to another video here. My name is Wasted Potential, and today we are doing something a little bit different here. I know it's been a little while, but I wanted to actually take a look at the NFL and some players instead of stadiums for a difference. Um, Today we are taking a look at the NFL, and we're looking at the best quarterback seasons from every single franchise. So I think that's a super fun way to start off the series. I hope to be getting out some regular videos pretty soon here, but this one's just gonna sort of be a teaser tester for the series here. So let's hop right into it here. We are going in alphabetical order by the city name. Or state name, depending on what type of team it is. So we're starting off with the Arizona Cardinals, and the season I picked out is Carson Palmer's 2015 season. He led the team to a 13-3 record, won the NFC West. They beat the Packers in overtime in the divisional round that year, then lost to Cam Newton, the Carolina Panthers, in the NFC Championship, 45-19. He had a great season that year. Only had a 63.7% completion percentage, but threw for 4,671 yards, 35 touchdowns to only 11 interceptions. You love to see 3 or even 4-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That's just an outstanding season from a franchise we really don't see a ton of great quarterback play out of. Kyler Murray recently has looked pretty good, though. So they're on a great direction as far as the franchise goes. But that's definitely, I feel like, the best season in their franchise's history as far as quarterbacks go. And next up, that brings us to the Atlanta Falcons. And I think this one's a little bit of an obvious one for most people. It's the 2016 Matt Ryan season. This, of course, is the season he won the MVP, leading the Falcons to an 11-5 record. He threw touchdown passes to 13 different pass catchers that year. That's absolutely ridiculous. He had about a 70% completion rating, 4,900 yards, very close to 5,000, which is always impressive. 38 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions, so he was outstanding that year. Really, compared to all of his other years, this one really stands out. Beat the Seahawks in the divisional round 36-20, and the Packers in the NFC Championship that year 44-21. Of course, I think we all know what happened in the Super Bowl here. I don't really need to scar any Falcons fans here, but of course, that's a season I don't think Falcons fans will ever forget for really two reasons: because of Matt Ryan and because, of course, how that Super Bowl ended up going down. So next up on the list here is the 2019 Lamar Jackson season for the Baltimore Ravens. He won MVP that year. They're the only team that year to score more than 20 points in every single regular season game. Only team to score more than half of their possessions that year as well. So that's really impressive. Half of their drives, I should say. I'm not sure really what the difference is, but it specifies that it's their drives. I don't see possessions there anywhere, so that's kind of interesting. Franchise record for points in the seasons that year. They were upset by the Titans in the divisional round, of course, where they only put up 12 points to the Titans 28, so really went off-brand for the playoffs, and that's where you see a lot of teams fall off. Now, Lamar only had 3,100 yards passing, but he had 36 passing touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Of course, everyone knows he's really dangerous on his feet, and that's where he stood out this year. But again, he's first-team All-Pro and the MVP. Can't remember. I don't think this is unanimous MVP, but it might have been. Was a really impressive season. Of course, he's having an impressive season this year, but we'll see how that falls. And the next guy on the list here, we'll see how that falls for him as well, because the next season I have here, or the next franchise, just to say, is the Buffalo Bills, and I have Josh Allen's 2020 season on here. I know, sorry, Jim Kelly fans, but I really couldn't ignore this one. He finished second in MVP voting that year. He led the team to their highest scoring season ever, just like Lamar Jackson did in 2019. Defeated the Colts 27-24 in the first playoff win since 1995. Then the Ravens in the divisional round 17-3. But of course, they lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game that year, 38-24. He threw for about 70% completion, 4,500 yards, 37 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. Outstanding. You know he's dangerous on his feet too. I think he had I know his touchdowns were in the 40s that year. I don't have the exact number in front of me for combined passing and rushing touchdowns, but man, he had an insane season that year. He's really going off this year. I'm excited to see how he finishes out the season, but 2020 for the Buffalo Bills for Josh Allen. And next up on the list here is 2015, Cam Newton for the Carolina Panthers. He won MVP that year. I think everyone remembers this season. They went 15-1 that year. They beat the Seahawks in the divisional round 31-24, and then just absolutely destroyed the Cardinals. Like I mentioned before, that was the Carson Palmer-led team, 45-19 to go on to the Super Bowl against the Broncos. They would lose on one of the most important plays of the game, being Newton's probably biggest screw-up of the year, all season, honestly. It was in the biggest game of the year when he didn't jump on that fumble. I think everyone remembers that, but just what a way to finish off the best season of your career, just on an absolutely terrible play, to be honest. He should have jumped in there, but looking back on it after the years, it's not as bad as I think we thought it was, but at the time, man, that was a really big deal. But again, Cam Newton, he just smashed the record books for the Carolina Panthers that year. He had 45 total touchdowns, I believe, 35 of them being through the air, 10 of them on the ground, only threw 10 interceptions, just under 4,000 yards. So not a ton of passing yards, but again, just another guy who was dangerous on his feet. Of course, first team All-Pro that year, and again, MVP award, and Cam Newton's only one that season. Next up is a franchise with a very questionable QB history. It's the Chicago Bears. That's why I kind of really got to go right back there for this one. 1943, Sid Luckman. He won first team All-Pro that season. It was really one of the best early passing seasons for any QB, for any team, let alone the Bears, who still don't have a 4,000-yard passer this season. Did not get anywhere near 4,000 yards, 2,200 yards for Sid Luckman. I believe it was 28 interceptions, or 28 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, which is really good at the time, to be honest. He led the Bears to an 8-1 record, so 10 games in the season that year. They tied one. So at the time, that was a lot more common. They would win the championship game against the Washington Redacteds at Wrigley Field that year, which is great for them. It was 41-21. Really, this is one of the best seasons for the Chicago Bears anytime recently, other than 1985. I can't remember another great season for the Bears other than when they lost to the Peyton Manning-led Colts, and I don't remember what year that was exactly, but that opening return touchdown was amazing that game. But really not a lot of luck at quarterback since Rex Grossman. He's not getting you that far, obviously. Next up on the list is Joe Burrow's 2021 season for the Cincinnati Bengals. He won Comeback Player of the Year that year, leading the Bengals to a 10-7 record. You know, Boomer Esiason had a couple good years. Trying to remember what the other fellow's name is. He was really the closest one to beating one of Joe Burrow's seasons, but I couldn't help but put Joe Burrow up here. Because this 2021 season was really good. It was only his, second year in the league. He threw for 4,600 yards, 34 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, which you'd like to see those numbers down a little bit more, but for a young quarterback, it's not bad. He was throwing 70%. They would beat the Raiders in the wild card round that year, 26-19, and then the Titans in the divisional round, 19-16, facing the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, where they would actually defeat Pat Mahomes that year, 27-24 at Arrowhead Stadium in overtime. In the Super Bowl that year, of course, they would face the Rams, and they would lose 23-20, but an outstanding season by Joe Burrow and an unforgettable season for any Broncos fans out there. Bengals fans. Wow. And next up on the list is the 1953 season by Otto Graham for the Cleveland Browns. I had to put this one up here. The man never gets as much respect as he deserves. First team All-Pro season, led the Browns to an 11-1 record into the NFL Championship, where they would actually unfortunately lose in a nail-biter to the Detroit Lions, 17-16. But they have plenty of championships in the 40s and 50s, especially Otto Graham. So I don't think that they are hurting too much from that one. He threw for 2,700 yards that year, which is really a lot for the time. Only 11 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, but you got to remember this was a ground-based team, so anytime they're in the red zone, they were handing off the ball to their power backs. But really, one of the great early seasons by any quarterback, and Otto Graham was the GOAT before Joe Montana, really at the time, or Joe Namath, or whoever was the GOAT in the 60s and 70s before Montana. I couldn't really tell you exactly because there was a lot of questionable quarterback play at the time, but Otto Graham putting up the numbers in 1953. Next on the list is Roger Staubach's 1977 season for the Dallas Cowboys. At 35, he led the Cowboys to a 12-2 regular season with 3 game-winning drives that year. He beat the Bears in the divisional round and the Vikings in the NFC Championship. They went on to play and beat the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl 27-10 that year. So, of course, winning is a big metric I use in this list here. I mean, obviously, the numbers are really important, but if your team's not successful, it really doesn't matter. I think there might be only one player on here for a team with a losing record on the whole entire list, and I'll talk about it later why that is, why that player made it on here, but it does kind of make sense. But Roger Staubach this season in 1977, he threw for 2,600 yards. I believe it was 18 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, which is a decent ratio, and for the time, it was a lot better when you adjust it to today. So that's another big thing you got to think about. Of course, these guys back in the day, they're not putting up crazy numbers like they are today. So 18 touchdowns to 9 interceptions is a great number. He won a Pro Bowl nod that year, no MVP. I don't believe he was even second team All-Pro. But I was really surprised to look back at the Troy Aikman numbers, and they didn't pop off the page as much as I thought they would. Captain Comeback really seemed to have the better career as far as Cowboys quarterbacks goes. And next up on the list is Matthew Stafford's 2011 season for the Detroit Lions. I really thought about putting Bobby Lane's one season on here. I believe it was 1951 or so. Can't remember exactly, but I thought against it because, man, the numbers for Stafford this year are ridiculous. 5,000 yards, 41 touchdowns to only 16 interceptions. I mean, for that time, especially for the Lions, they were terrible those years before there, so that's a big turnaround. They had a 10-6 record. Again, he threw for 5,000 yards, which was the 4th time ever up to that point. So, we've been lucky recently with some more 5,000-yard passers, but at the time, that was really, really an amazing feat. They made the playoffs for the first time since 1999, but unfortunately, they did lose to the Saints 45-28 in the wild card round. And Stafford was awarded the Comeback Player of the Year award that year. Can't remember in particular if they got injured or not the year before, but they did give him Comeback Player of the Year. I'd assume that he must have, because I can't imagine any other reason why he would have won that award. That was early on in his career. So what an amazing season, though. I hadn't realized that he threw for 5,000 yards that early into his career. Again, 2011 season for Matthew Stafford. And next up on the list is 2013 Peyton Manning for the Denver Broncos. He won MVP that year. I think a lot of people remember this season. Threw for 55 touchdowns, which is still an NFL record. Led the Broncos to a 13-3 record, smashing a ton of offensive records along the way. They beat the Chargers in the divisional round 24-17, then the Pats 26-16 in the AFC Championship. However, they were really dominated in the Super Bowl by the Seahawks. 43-8. It's probably the worst Super Bowl I've ever seen in my lifetime. I remember that opening snap went over Tom Brady, went over Peyton Manning's head for safety, and that was just from there on you knew the game was controlled by the Seahawks, and the Broncos really never got an opportunity to come back in that game, and ended up just being a terrible Super Bowl. And next up, though, is the Aaron Rodgers season for 2011 for the Green Bay Packers. A lot of people remember this one too. He won MVP that year. He threw for 45 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions, completely ridiculous. 4,600 yards passing. He led the team to a 15-1 record, and of course won the NFC North title, but were shockingly upset in the divisional round to the Giants, 37-20. You got to remember the Packers had just won the Super Bowl against the Steelers the year before this one. So it was really, they had improved in every single way in terms of stats, and then they go around and they lose to the Giants. But I'm sure anyone who hates the Patriots is thankful for that, because Eli Manning's that Patriots killer, and 2011 was another magical year. But anyways, next up on the list is the Houston Texans 2023 season for CJ Stroud. Notably, I believe it's the only rookie season on the list. I'd have to double check, but the young Texans really don't have a lot of notable quarterback history. Stroud did win Offensive Rookie of the Year that year. Of course, he turned the team around in 1 year from a 3-win season to a 10-win season, just absolutely ridiculous. They destroyed the Browns in the wild card round that year, 45-14. but then they succumbed to the Ravens in the divisional round 34-10. It really looks strange this year because Stroud's not having a great season per se, but not terrible. Well, maybe terrible by his standards. But I mean, this is just a really notable season for rookies, especially. But especially because it was probably the best season in franchise history as far as quarterback play goes. So, I mean, that's a great season to have it in your rookie year. And next up on the list is the 2004 season by Peyton Manning for the Indianapolis Colts. So he is on this list twice. He broke the single season record for touchdown passes that year as well with 49, surpassing, I believe it was Dan Marino's 48 passing touchdowns, which we may or may not talk about that season later in the list. Of course, he won MVP that year. It was his second MVP out of 5 in his career, which is, again, ridiculous. Led the Colts to a 12-4 record. They beat the Broncos in the wild card round that year 49-24, but then lost to the Patriots in the divisional round 20-3. And again, Peyton Manning, 5 MVP seasons. That man you could make a whole list of top MVP seasons with that man. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. 1996, Mark Brunell. Because the Jags really don't have a strong history of quarterback play either. I mean, I look through all of T-Law's seasons, even Blake Bortles one season there that he had a good season. I wasn't that impressed by it, but even this season I'm not impressed by. I mean, it's 19 touchdowns to 20 interceptions. You got to do better than that, really. But, I mean, any other team other than the Jags, he wouldn't have made this list. 4,300 passing yards, though, 63% completion percentage. Again, you'd like to see that be a little bit higher, but good amount of yards. But really, one of the reasons he made this list is the Jags stunned in the playoffs this particular season. They defeated the Bills, which, they were really not expecting to beat the Bills, who had been to the playoffs, 4 years previously before that? 4 Super Bowls in a row. It was crazy. They also stunned the 13-3 Broncos in the divisional round that year, and they put up a great fight against the Patriots in the AFC Championship, but ended up losing to them 20-6. Next up is the Chiefs 2018 season from Patrick Mahomes. Of course, he won MVP that year, threw for 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards, completion percentage of 66%, which is solid, but that's really the only low number I would say, and that's low for Patrick Mahomes level play. Again, led the Chiefs to a 12-4 record that year, beat the Colts 31-13 in the divisional round, advancing to face Tom Brady and the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. An awesome game. The Chiefs would end up losing 37-31. How many quarterbacks have already listed on this list who came to an end in the playoffs? Their amazing season came to an end in the playoffs to Tom Brady. I mean, it's ridiculous how much that man screwed up the NFL for so many years. Off of really boring quarterback play. Like, I have to be honest, other than that 2007 season, Tom Brady was kind of a boring style quarterback, but he was entertaining in the way that you knew pretty much every drive he was going to score on your team and ruin your dreams, which really hurts. Moving on, though, is the 2002 season from Rich Gannon for the Oakland Raiders. A 37-year-old Rich Gannon came out of nowhere in 2002 to win MVP that season. The Raiders had an 11-5 record. He threw for almost 4,700 yards, 26 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. He dismantled the Jets 30-10 in the divisional round, and then the Titans 41-24 in the AFC Championship that year. But unfortunately, he'd have his worst game in the Super Bowl that season against the Buccaneers. He threw multiple pick sixes, I think 3 or 4 picks, and the Raiders would be blown out 48-21. I don't remember the season that well, but I just remember everyone being like, why the hell does Rich Gannon get the MVP? I mean, not that anyone else deserved it, but this guy came out of nowhere. I mean, you got to remember, he's 37 years old. He's like a career backup. It's like Geno Smith winning the MVP now. So, I mean, that was out of nowhere, and really just interesting season from Rich Gannon, something I don't think we'll see again for a long time in the NFL. Next up on the list is the 1981 season by Dan Fouts for the San Diego Chargers. Dan was throwing bombs this year, 33 touchdowns, nearly 5,000 yards, 4,800 to be exact. I'm trying to remember how many touchdowns he threw this season. I mean, how many interceptions? I believe 17. I got a Pro Bowl nod that season. The Chargers would go 10-6 as well. They beat the Finns in the divisional round in a shootout, 41-38. I believe it was overtime. But they did end up losing the AFC Championship game that year to the Bengals. I believe that was the Bengals' first Super Bowl appearance. Of course, they would lose to the San Francisco 49ers there. Up next on the list is the 1999 season for the St. Louis Rams. Of course, Kurt Warner, the director of the greatest show on turf. I showed up this year winning MVP honors. The Rams dominated, putting up a 13-3 record, beating the Vikings and Buccaneers in the NFC playoffs to face off against the Music City Miracle Titans. The Rams would iconically win this game by just a single yard, and in just a short span of years, Warner had gone from bagging groceries for minimum wage to an NFL MVP millionaire. And also just a big turnaround for the Rams franchise in general. And they smashed a ton of offensive records this year. 1999, just an amazing team. Of course, a lot of notable guys on that team. Torrey Holt, Marshall Faulk, just an amazing offense. Next up is the 1984 season for the Miami Dolphins. Of course, Dan Marino, the OG Danny Dimes. Another season where a quarterback rewrote the NFL record books. This is really the oldest one that a lot of people now still remember, of a quarterback just coming in and dominating in a single season, rewriting the history books. He threw for 5,000 yards this season in 1984. Completely ridiculous. 48 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. Kind of a high for interceptions for a 16-game season. But the league had no other choice but to give him MVP. Just a dominant season. The league would see a passing renaissance following the Dolphins drafting Dan Marino, and the season was really the epicenter of that. Going 14-2 in the regular season, they would beat the Seahawks in the divisional round, who you got to remember was an AFC team at the time. Beat them 31-10. Then they would face the Steelers in the next round and beat them 45-28 in a statement win. Marino, though, would go on to lose the Super Bowl 38-16 to the Dynasty 49ers, and Marino really, he'd get close again, but he'd never win the big one, of course, as everyone knows. 1998, moving on here, the Minnesota Vikings' greatest quarterback season by Randall Cunningham. He finished second in MVP voting that year, received first-team All-Pro honors. The Vikings would have a franchise best 15-1 record that season. Young Randy Moss, of course, helped out greatly. They would beat the Cardinals in the divisional round 41-21 that season. They would face the Falcons in the NFC Championship. And, of course, in that overtime thriller, they would actually end up losing by 30-27, thanks Gary Anderson. Although a lot of people forget he didn't miss the game-winning field goal. He just missed a field goal to give them the lead, ending regulation. So, he did end up kind of losing the game for them, but you kind of got to put it on the team at that point. The game didn't end on the right foot of Gary Anderson. Next up, I think this is the least surprising one on the list. Of course, it's the New England Patriots. I think everyone can guess who that is. The year, though, is 2007. Tom Brady. I kind of mentioned this before, but this is the GOAT's magnus opus season. Maybe some would consider it not his best. I personally would, but it's his most iconic season. Throwing for 4,800 yards, 50 passing touchdowns, which I believe was the record at the time. Only 8 interceptions. That's ridiculous. Won MVP, led the Patriots to an undefeated regular season record. They cruised past the Jags and the Chargers in the AFC bracket. Then, of course, they would face Eli Manning and the Giants in the Super Bowl, and the rest is history from there. The 72 Dolphins will always be indebted to that Giants team. Really, I think everyone is outside of New England. Nobody wanted to see Tom Brady win that Super Bowl, especially undefeated. And moving on from there is the New Orleans Saints, 2011 Drew Brees season. Threw for a ridiculous almost 5,500 yards. It was 5,476 yards, 46 passing touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 13-3 record for the Saints. Brees would finish second in MVP honors that season. The Saints would beat the Lions 45-28 in the wild card round before losing to the Niners 36-32 in the divisional round that year. You could throw a lot of Drew Brees seasons on here for the Saints, but this one really stood out to me just for the volume of yardage. Of course, they didn't win the Super Bowl that season, but didn't end up mattering too much because the Saints only have one in their whole entire franchise. Moving on here The next season for the Giants here is the 1963 season by Y.A. Tittle. Tittle won MVP that year, led the Giants to an 11-3 record. They had the league's best offense that season, and in the NFL championship game, because I don't really remember, I don't think at the time there was playoff games. If you had the league's best or second best record, you'd play in the NFL championship game. And the Giants that year, though, would lose that game to the league's best defense, the Chicago Bears, 14-10 at Chicago's Wrigley Field, actually. So that's interesting. They used to play the NFL championship game quite a bit at Wrigley Field. Next up is the New York Jets, 1968 Joe Namath season. Broadway Joe was awarded first team All-Pro honors in 1968. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns that year, but that was kind of the norm for his career and also for a lot of quarterbacks at the time. More importantly, he led the Jets to an 11-3 record, winning the AFL East Division. The Jets would beat the Raiders in the AFL Championship that year, 27-23. He would then guarantee a victory in the Super Bowl against the Colts. Ultimately, the Jets would win that game 16-7, securing the franchise's only Lombardi trophy. Next up is the Philadelphia Eagles. And Randall Cunningham, again, making the list here. Randall had an outstanding 1990 season, which led him to finish second in MVP voting. He threw for 30 touchdowns, and the Eagles finished with a 10-6 record. The Eagles would end up losing in the wild card round that year, though, losing to the Washington Redacteds 20-6. Next up is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 1978. I really struggled not putting one of Big Ben's seasons here, but Terry Bradshaw's 78 season was one for the ages, really. He won MVP that year, went 14-2 in the regular season. The Steelers dominated the AFC playoffs against the Broncos and Oilers that year, and they secured another Lombardi trophy, defeating the Cowboys 35-31 in the Super Bowl. That was Super Bowl 13. He threw for almost 3,000 yards. I want to say let's see, what are the numbers for more touchdowns and interceptions here? 28 touchdowns to 20 interceptions. I mean, Terry Bradshaw, he's known as the Blonde Bomber for a reason. He threw a lot of interceptions, to be honest. You can't really justify that too much, but I mean, compared to Big Ben, he won a lot more games, a lot more Super Bowls, actually. Which I think kind of ends up being more important as far as a career goes. Moving on, though, to the San Francisco 49ers, Joe Montana. He would win MVP this season. He would finish with a 14-2 record, securing another NFC West title. Marino claimed 70% completion mark, which was really rare at the time. It was a really dominant season for him. The Niners also, they dominated the playoffs that year, beating the Vikings 41-13, then the Rams 30-3 before facing the Broncos in the Super Bowl. Montana would beat them handily, 55-10, bolstering his argument for GOAT at the time. I mean, he was really the GOAT until, I'd say, Tom Brady won that Super Bowl against the Falcons. That really secured the GOAT conversation for Tom Brady. But all that time before that, Montana was the all-time GOAT for most people. Maybe Lawrence Taylor or Jim Brown or someone. But, I mean, for me, it was Joe Montana at least. And this season happened to be his best. In 1989, he was getting older. He was 33, and this was kind of just before he ended up going to the Chiefs. Next up is the Seattle Seahawks, though. 2015 season by Russell Wilson. The Seahawks perhaps aren't really a QB-heavy franchise, but Wilson stands out from the crowd, particularly this season. He improved almost every major stat from previous years. He threw for 34 touchdowns and helped lead the team to a 10-6 record. They defeated the Vikings 10-9 in the wildcard round before losing to the aforementioned Panthers in the divisional round 31-24. 4,000 passing yards, 34 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Really good season, and of course, the Seahawks had a pretty notable season, though. They didn't win the Super Bowl or really a lot of playoff games that year, but they had the one nice victory against the Vikings. That was pretty sure that was the game that Blair Walsh missed that field goal. Now that I think about it, that was hilarious. Moving on, though, 2021 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm pretty sure we all know who this is. Again, Tom Brady, at the bright young age of 44. He threw for 5,300 yards, 43 touchdowns. I can't help but laugh. I mean, that's ridiculous. Finished second in MVP voting. The Buccaneers would end up going 13-4 that season. They did win the Super Bowl the year before, of course, so they were looking to repeat, and they ended up beating the Eagles in the wild card round 31-15, but they ended up losing to the Rams 30-27 in the divisional round, ending their hopes for that, of course, pretty much ending Tom Brady's career, sort of, not in a negative way, but what an amazing season for a 44-year-old. And speaking of longevity, the next guy on this list for the Tennessee Titans / Houston Oilers is George Blanda. His 1961 season at the age of 34 is their best season. I finished first team All-Pro that season. I am only judging off of quarterback play, but he did play kicker as well. He led the Oilers that season to a 10-3-1 record, winning the AFL championship after defeating the Chargers 10-3. Of course, they were in the AFL. That was its own league at the time. Blanda would throw for 3,330 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 22 interceptions, which those are ridiculous numbers for the time. What's really most crazy to me is his touchdown percentage is 9.9, which is really, really high. But George Blanda, he ended up becoming the oldest player in NFL history by the time he ended his career. So, him and Tom Brady being back-to-back there really makes sense, because Tom Brady, he might be the second oldest, but he might be third. Vinatieri played for a long time. I think Vinatieri played for longer than Brady, but I can't quite remember. But to round off our list here is Sammy Baugh of the Washington football team, as I like to say. Commanders, that's a terrible name. I liked football team. It was funny to me, but you could also be serious about it. Remind me of like European soccer teams, football teams, whatever you want to call them. But he actually had his career best year in, as I mentioned, 1947 at the age of 33. There were quite a few seasons I could have put on here for Washington quarterbacks. They do have quite a few good quarterbacks: Doug Williams, Joe Theismann. But slinging Sammy Baugh, he was revolutionary for his time. Definitely the most revolutionary QB in Washington's history. This, of course, was his best season. He threw for 25 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, almost 3,000 yards, 2,938 yards, which is like a QB throwing 60 touchdowns and 5,000, 6,000 yards now. Secured second-team All-Pro honors. However, the team struggled that year, probably why I didn't get first-team All-Pro. And they did struggle a lot around that time. And like I mentioned, this is the only quarterback season who was on a team with a losing record. And because up until 1962, Washington football team, they refused to sign any black players whatsoever. What an L of a franchise. I didn't realize they were the last ones to do that, though. It was that late, 62. When did Jackie Robinson play? NFL players were integrating black players well before the MLB was. At least major league teams. I don't know about maybe minor league teams, maybe earlier, but I'm not 100% sure. That's just ridiculous, though. And what a weirdly uncomfortable way to end this video. Kind of a weird topic. But Slinging Sammy dotted them up back in the day. He was a dog. In this season, 60% completion. Looking back on it, wow, we have greatly improved quarterback play now, and thank God for it, because it's much more entertaining than run up the middle. I love the wing tee. I love me some wishbone offense as well, but I think passing, and nothing gets better than that. You never know when the ball's going to get turned over, but at the same time, you never know. Your team might just break away a 99-yard touchdown at any point. 99-yard runs, they happen, but it's a lot more likely you get that off a pass play, 97-yard touchdowns, stuff like that. But really, this video just made me appreciate the modern quarterback play, and of the 2010s was maybe the best era of all time for quarterback play. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it, but I know I've been kind of out of the game recently, but I've been trying to get back into it. Been busy with school and watching pro and college football and NBA and NHL starting up too. I'm a Pirates fan, so usually the baseball season doesn't take up too much of my time because we don't have a lot to root for. Paul Skeens was a nice change this year, but you can only hope for so much with this ownership group. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys recommend anything, please leave a comment below. I would be happy to get back to you or make a video about it. Hopefully, I'd love to start doing lists like this. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please leave me a like if you enjoyed, and hope to see you guys in the next video.